The boarding gate buzzed with chatter, rolling suitcases, and tired sighs of travelers waiting to board. In the middle of the first-class line stood a sharply dressed black man, calm and collected, ticket in hand, but before he could take a single step forward, a flight attendant cut him off. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, her tone clipped and cold. "Sir, this line is for first-class passengers. Economy is over there." Heads turned, whispers spread. The man stood tall, silent, and steady. What happened next would leave the entire cabin stunned. Stay with me until the end, because the twist in this story is something you'll never forget. His name was Marcus Taylor, and on the surface, he looked like any other well-dressed traveler. A navy blue suit, polished shoes, and a leather briefcase gave the impression of confidence and success. But what most people didn't know was that Marcus's journey to that boarding gate had been anything but easy. Marcus grew up in a small town where opportunities were scarce and judgments came quickly. From a young age, he learned what it felt like to be underestimated, teachers who assumed he wouldn't excel, store clerks who followed him around, strangers who judged him before he even spoke. His mother used to remind him, "They'll doubt you, son, but never doubt yourself." Those words became his compass. With relentless drive, Marcus pushed through every barrier. He studied harder than anyone else, earned scholarships, and climbed his way into a respected career as a civil rights attorney. His work had taken him across the country, fighting for fairness in places where people were told they had none. This flight was supposed to be simple, a trip to a major conference where Marcus would deliver a keynote speech on equality and justice. The airline had booked him in first class, a small recognition of the work he had done to uplift others. For Marcus, it wasn't about the luxury of the seat. It was about something deeper, proof that his hard work had brought him from being overlooked to being honored. But as he approached the boarding line that morning, Marcus felt that familiar weight in the air, the kind that always came before someone questioned his right to be where he was. And he was right that the airport terminal was alive with the usual mix of chaos and routine, children tugging at parents, business travelers glued to their phones, and the constant hum of announcements echoing overhead. Marcus waited patiently near the front of the first-class line, his boarding pass ready in hand. When the loudspeaker finally called for first-class passengers, he stepped forward. A few eyes followed him, curious, some indifferent, others quietly surprised. Marcus had felt those stares before, the silent question lingering in people's minds, does he really belong here? The flight attendant at the gate barely glanced at the boarding passes of the passengers ahead of him. With friendly smiles, she waved them through. But when Marcus reached her podium, her demeanor shifted. She straightened her posture, narrowed her eyes, and scanned him from head to toe. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice firm but clipped. "This line is for first-class boarding." Marcus raised his brows slightly, still calm. "Yes, I know," he replied, offering his ticket. "Forward." The attendant didn't reach for it. Instead, she tilted her head and pointed toward the much longer economy line snaking across the terminal. "Economy boarding will be announced shortly. That's your line over there." A hush rippled through the small crowd nearby. A couple waiting behind Marcus exchanged a glance. Another man smirked, as though he had been expecting this. Marcus felt the weight of every eye on him. His fingers tightened around the boarding pass, but his voice remained steady. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I'm in the right place." The attendant's lips pressed into a thin line, and instead of checking the ticket in front of her, she squared her shoulders, ready to argue. This was only the beginning. The air around the gate grew heavier, as if every conversation in the terminal had slowed to catch the unfolding scene. The attendant's eyes narrowed. "Sir, I need you to step aside. You're holding up the line." Marcus kept his composure, his hand steady as he extended his boarding pass once more. "I assure you, I'm not mistaken. This is first class." She didn't even glance at the paper. "I've been doing this job for years," she snapped, her voice carrying just loud enough for the crowd to hear. "I know who belongs in this line." Whispers broke out behind him. A young man muttered, "Just go to economy and save the hassle." Another passenger, an older woman with kind eyes, frowned and whispered, "Why doesn't she just check his ticket?" Marcus felt the familiar sting of humiliation creep in. He had been through this before, in restaurants, in stores, even in hotel lobbies, the subtle but sharp message that he didn't belong. A memory flickered. The time he was a teenager, asked to leave a store because someone assumed he couldn't afford anything inside. The same cold judgment was written across this flight attendant's face now. "Ma'am," Marcus said calmly, his voice lower but firm, "you haven't even looked at my boarding pass." Her jaw tightened. She crossed her arms. "If you don't move to the other line, I'll have to call security." A ripple of shock passed through the nearby passengers. Some gasped, others shook their heads. The couple behind Marcus whispered angrily, "This isn't right." Marcus's pulse quickened, but outwardly he remained composed. Years of experience had taught him that anger would only feed the doubt. Still, the weight of being questioned, so publicly, gnawed at him. He could feel his dignity being stripped away, piece by piece, under the stares of strangers. Finally, the attendant waved her hand toward a nearby supervisor. "Can you come here? We have someone trying to board in the wrong line." The supervisor, a middle-aged man with a clipboard, approached, clearly uncomfortable with the growing spectacle. He looked at Marcus, then at the attendant. "What's the issue here?" The attendant's response was immediate and sharp. "This gentleman insists he's first class, but I think he's mistaken." The supervisor studied Marcus silently for a moment, then gestured toward the boarding pass still in his hand. "Let me see the ticket, sir." Marcus exhaled slowly. "Finally, and in that moment, the entire gate leaned in, waiting to see what truth the little slip of paper would reveal. Marcus handed the supervisor his boarding pass with deliberate calm, the edges of the paper pressed firmly between his fingers. The crowd leaned closer, some craning their necks just to catch a glimpse. The supervisor scanned the ticket. His brow furrowed, then lifted. He checked again, this time slower, careful, not to miss a detail. Silence stretched in the air like a taut string. Finally, he cleared his throat. "This is a first-class boarding pass." Seat 2. Gasps rippled through the line. A few passengers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Others shook their heads at the absurdity of what they had just witnessed. Marcus's expression didn't change. He simply nodded, reclaiming his ticket. But the flight attendant's face drained of color. Her lips parted as if to argue, yet no words came out. For the first time in the entire exchange, she looked uncertain. The supervisor gestured toward the jet bridge. "You're free to board, sir. My apologies for the delay." Marcus adjusted the strap of his briefcase and stepped forward, the weight of dozens of stares trailing behind him. He didn't speak, didn't gloat, didn't even glance back, but the message was clear. He had always belonged there. As Marcus walked down the jet bridge, the weight of the moment lingered behind him. He could still feel the stares pressing into his back, each passenger silently grappling with what they had just witnessed. When he entered the aircraft, the first-class cabin was calm and pristine. Plush leather seats, warm lighting, and the faint scent of brewed coffee filled the air. A few passengers already seated looked up as he passed. Some offered polite nods, but others gave longer glances, not of judgment, but of quiet respect. Marcus placed his briefcase in the overhead bin and slid into seat 2A. The comfort of the seat should have felt like relief, but his mind replayed the incident at the gate. He wasn't surprised by what had happened, not really. It wasn't the first time his presence had been doubted, and he knew it likely wouldn't be the last. What stung wasn't the mistake itself, but the certainty with which he had been dismissed. Moments later, the same flight attendant stepped into the cabin. Her steps faltered when her eyes met his. For a brief second, Marcus thought she might speak an apology, maybe even an explanation. Instead, she turned quickly, busying herself with the preparations. Across the aisle, a woman leaned forward and whispered, "Good for you. You handled that with such grace." Marcus gave her a small smile in return, but said nothing. As the plane filled, the atmosphere remained unusually tense. It was as though every passenger carried the memory of what had just happened onto the aircraft, tucked into the overhead bins right alongside their luggage. And for Marcus, that silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. As the flight settled into its rhythm, the ding of seatbelt signs, the hum of engines, the shuffle of attendants moving through the aisles, Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were neatly organized notes, drafts, and a highlighted speech he had rehearsed countless times. In just a few hours, Marcus was scheduled to stand before an audience of lawyers, activists, and community leaders at one of the most important civil rights conferences of the year. His keynote was titled, "The Silent Barriers We Still Face." Irony wasn't lost on him. The very discrimination he had planned to address had just played out in real time, right at the boarding gate. Marcus wasn't just any passenger traveling for business. He had built his career on fighting these exact injustices. Courtroom by courtroom, he had defended individuals who were denied opportunities, who were judged unfairly, who were told in subtle, and sometimes not so subtle ways that they didn't belong. His work had earned him national recognition, but Marcus didn't care about fame. What mattered to him was progress. He wanted his son, still only 10 years old, to grow up in a world where walking into a first-class line didn't raise eyebrows, where opportunity wasn't questioned before merit was even seen. The incident at the gate was a painful reminder that no matter how far he or society had come, there was still a long road ahead. As the plane cruised high above the clouds, Marcus made a note in the margin of his speech. Real change doesn't just happen in courtrooms or on stages. It happens in everyday places, like airports, classrooms, and offices where dignity should never be up for debate. For Marcus, the flight was no longer just about getting to a conference. It had become part of the very story he would tell. Hours later, as the plane touched down and passengers prepared to disembark, Marcus remained seated for a moment longer. He watched the familiar shuffle, people eager to grab bags, stretched legs, return to routines. For most, this flight would be nothing more than a memory of a trip, but for Marcus, it had become something far more meaningful. The sting of being questioned so openly, so confidently, still lingered. Yet as he gathered his belongings, he realized the incident was more than an insult. It was a reflection of the very struggle he had committed his life to confronting. Prejudice didn't always wear a name tag. It often appeared in quick assumptions, in unchecked certainty, in the tiny moments where people decided who belonged and who didn't. Single quotes, TIDN single quotes, TID. As he stepped off the plane and into the bustling airport, Marcus knew he would carry the story with him into that conference hall, not as a tale of bitterness, but as a reminder that change doesn't come from silence. Change begins when ordinary people witness injustice, question it, and choose to act differently the next time. For those passengers who had watched silently at the gate, the moment may have passed quickly, but perhaps one of them would remember the quiet strength with which Marcus stood his ground. Perhaps another would think twice before making the same assumption. Even small ripples mattered. Later that evening, as Marcus stood before the packed auditorium, he opened his keynote speech, not with a statistic, not with a quote, but with a story. He told them about a morning flight, about a boarding pass, and about the weight of being doubted before being seen. The audience sat in silence, hanging on every word, and as he looked out over the crowd, Marcus realized something profound. His dignity hadn't been diminished at that gate. It had been magnified. Because dignity isn't granted by someone else. It's carried within, unshaken, no matter who chooses to doubt it. Stories like Marcus's remind us that the most powerful lessons don't always come from textbooks or speeches. They unfold in everyday moments, at airport gates, in grocery stores, in classrooms, where the question of dignity quietly hangs in the balance. What happened that day wasn't just about one man trying to board a plane. It was about something larger, the courage to stand firm when the world insists you don't belong, and the grace to prove your worth without lowering yourself to anger. And here's the truth. All of us, at some point, will either be in Marcus' shoes, or in the shoes of someone watching from the sidelines. The real question is, when the moment comes, how will you respond? If this story moved you, inspired you, or even made you reflect on your own experiences, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Marcus, or if you were standing in that boarding line? Don't forget to hit the like button if you believe more people should hear stories like this. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel, because we share real thought-provoking stories every week that shine a light on dignity, resilience, and the human spirit. Until next time, remember, respect is a right, not a privilege.